All right, so today we are going to talk about the Northern Cheyenne and their reservation here in Montana. Now, as you can see from this map, we have 7 reservations in Montana, but like the Northern Cheyenne, all of our tribes did not originally claim just these small plots of land as their home. So today we're going to talk about the Northern Cheyenne over here in southeastern Montana and how they ended up calling this small chunk of land their own. Originally, the Northern Cheyenne tribe, who we can see their seal here today, lived on the Red Fork of the Powdered River in the very southeastern corner of Montana where it meets up with the Dakotas. It's a beautiful bit of land that unfortunately was also sought after by white settlers. So it became a contentious piece of land where whites and the Northern Cheyenne were fighting for it. Now, the Northern Cheyenne had been living in this land for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Recorded history shows that they've been there at least since the 1600s. But because it was such a popular and beautiful, lush land, settlers fought with the Northern Cheyenne for this property. And there were many battles and some very decisive battles that would eventually lead to the Northern Cheyenne being forced off of their land to Indian territory. One of those decisive battles, if not the most decisive battle, was the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Many tribes took part in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, including the Northern Cheyenne, but it was a decisive Indian victory, and the cavalry did not appreciate that much. So in the months following the Battle of the Little Bighorn, many tribes, including the Northern Cheyenne, were targeted by the cavalry and forced into relocation in Indian territory. So let's just do a little bit of geography here. Let's start by looking at the map of the United States that we recognize today. Up north, we can see Montana, where we call home, and a little bit south, we can see Oklahoma. Now, during the time of following the Little Bighorn in the 1800s, Oklahoma territory, as we can see in this 1800s era map, was actually known as Indian territory. And all of the tribes in Montana that the cavalry were trying to relocate were headed towards Indian territory. And you can see here that they're not that close together. Oklahoma is quite a bit farther south than Montana, and thus the vegetation and lifestyle in Montana was vastly different from Indian territory, which ended up being significantly detrimental to the Northern Cheyenne once they were relocated by the cavalry into Indian territory. And many Northern Cheyenne began to die off in Indian territory. Now, there were 2 influential Northern Cheyenne leaders at this time who saw that the Cheyenne were doing horribly in Oklahoma territory. And those 2 chiefs were, standing up here, Chief Little Wolf and sitting down, Chief Dullknife. Together they decided that they needed to move their people back north to Montana. So they took a band of approximately 300 Northern Cheyenne and began heading north. Now, the 2 chiefs ended up differing on which direction they wanted to go to bring the people north, and they split off into 2 groups. Luckily, Chief Little Wolf's group was successful and moved north into the Dakota territories, where they found refuge on Indian reservation there. But unfortunately, Chief Dullknife and his people ran into some bad luck and the cavalry in Nebraska and became captured. Now, their captors tried to starve them into submission so that they would move back to Indian territory, but refusing, they eventually broke out of the fort, but were also, for the large part, recaptured and sent back to Oklahoma territory. Chief Dullknife, though, and 5 others were able to escape, and they escaped to Nebraska and the Pine Creek Reservation, where they would live out the remainder of their lives. Now, the handling of this relocation of the Northern Cheyenne people was so poorly looked upon by the American public that eventually the cavalry had to concede and give the Cheyenne their own territory in Montana. Today, we call this land the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in southeastern Montana, But it is not on the Powder River that the Northern Cheyenne originally called home. It is now on the Tongue River right next to the Crow Reservation. Unfortunately, though, this change and allowing of a reservation came a little too late, and Chief Dullknife, who had fought so hard for his people to come back to Montana, never got to see the reservation himself. He died 1 year before the reservation was created in 1863 on the Pine Creek Reservation. Now, his people, recognizing the work that he had tried to do in creating a reservation for his people and bringing his people back to Montana, was not forgotten. And today, Chief Dullknife and Chief Little Wolf can be found in the Lame Deer Cemetery on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, marked by a fence, as you can see here, honoring all of the efforts they made to get their people back to Montana. And that is the story of how the Northern Cheyenne came to be located where they are today on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana, despite the fact that this is actually not the land that they called home for hundreds of years before white settlers arrived in the area.